Scotiabank is committed to dismantling the barriers faced by women, because until true equality is reached, there is more work to do. Today, at our She Said Summit, we are coming together across our global and diverse footprint to continue our work, to listen, to educate, and to take action that is sustained over the long term. To begin, we'll start by listening. We've chosen to open the summit with our cornerstone video of our International Women's Day campaign. Since March 1st, it's been playing internationally on broadcast and social media, starting a conversation in Mexico, Canada, Panama, Costa Rica, Uruguay, Trinidad, Tobago, Bahamas, Jamaica, to name a few, and of course, on Scotiabank's workplace. It continues to gain momentum, and if you haven't seen it already, you will soon understand why. In only 90 seconds, it gets to the heart of why we've come together today, and to our shared moral imperative, to act for every future.
We've been saying the same thing for a long damn time, that women should be treated as equals.
But a world in which men and women are completely equal is still far from being realized.
We know there's no such thing as equality of achievement. What we plead for is equality of chance, equality of opportunity.
Women don't ask to be ahead of you or behind you. We just want to be by your side as equals.
To speak and be heard.
Because when unique voices are united in a common cause, they make history.
Because until all of us have made it, none of us have made it.
Because everything I just said,
other women
have said
before. In 2015,
2013,
1973,
1971,
and 1915.
over a century
of calling
for equality,
of saying the same words year after year,
trying to make them no longer make sense.
We've come a long way,
but accepting better than
Before,
only pushes truly equal
farther out of reach.
We need to work together
as women, as allies.
Don't just listen to what I'm saying.
Act, so I don't have to say it again.
We're here today so the next generation of women doesn't have to say those words again. But first, we need to address what gives us the right to join the conversation. Thanks to considerable effort over the last few years, Scotiabank is now in the position to make a meaningful change on gender equality and intersectionality, to be a leader in dismantling barriers to equality. We joined the See Her Gender Pledge and embraced inclusion by design in all our marketing to more equitably reflect our people and the communities we serve. We published our diversity and inclusion targets publicly to show we are accountable for meeting them and pairing our words with action. We're in the third year of Scotiabank Women Initiative, a $3 billion commitment to providing women with unbiased access to capital, financial, education, advice and mentorship. And we've launched Scotia Rise, a $500 million commitment to raising up underrepresented groups, including women, to allow them equal access to economic participation. Regardless of how far we've come, it's still not far enough. That's why so much of our summit content is focused on what more there is to do, so that everyone leaves today with a better understanding of how to move forward together.
We will work together as Scotiabankers in allyship so that we can all succeed. Together is the key word. Never before has Scotiabank come together for International Women's Day as an international collective until today. During this summit, you'll hear from colleagues across business lines and geographies, from our leaders of today and tomorrow, discussing the issues we face as employees, as customers, and as communities. We'll also shine a spotlight on some of the women who have led us through unique challenges over the past year, in the spirit of looking back to look forward. Today, our conversation is truly global, inclusive, and we hope, empowering. When unique voices are united, they make history. Gloria Steinem said that in 2013. And with that, let's get started with our first session. It's a discussion on a very important topic that will provide rich context for the remaining sessions. Here to discuss the economic impact on women as a result of the pandemic is our very own Chief Economist, J.F. Perot, and Dominique Fortier, Regional Managing Partner at Heidrick & Struggles, whose area of focus is talent search assignments for clients around the world, with expertise from board and CEO succession to team build-outs and talent development. So, let's come together to listen, to educate ourselves, and to act, so that what she said before doesn't have to be said again.
Good morning, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here today for the She Said Summit. As Scotiabank's chief economist, I spent a lot of time over last year trying to make sense of the pandemic, what it means for our clients, what it means for the economy, and what it means for various parts of our network, including women. Now, nearly a year into the pandemic, ongoing concerns about the health of the global economy, ongoing concerns about our health and safety continue, and there have been lots of reports about how the pandemic has adversely affected certain groups. Indigenous people, for instance, visible minorities, and of course, women. For the next half hour, Dominique and I are going to dig a little deeper into how the pandemic is affecting women from both a labor and a consumer perspective, and looking at what exactly the she recession is and what it means. Dominique, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, JF. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's wonderful to have you here. So, Dominique, to boil down what you do really simply, you're basically, one of the top talent scouts in the world for executive talent, and you help organizations like ours meet our needs. And in fact, you've helped our organization put us in touch with our key leaders. And in fact, you were critical in me coming over to the bank. With that background, what have you observed in the last year around recruiting top women executives?
Yeah, I would look, you think it's been almost a year now, right, Jeff? And what a change it's been over that period of time. And I think both for women and for the companies themselves, we're starting to see nearly every aspect of the way the companies view themselves, from their purpose to their workforce, as well as how they perform under pressure and in the face of uncertainty. So all of these things are changing all at the same time. With that, what we're seeing is that it's been an unprecedented time in terms of the change, and so therefore people are resorting back to what is known and comfortable to them. And so in appointing new CEOs, for example, which is part of our practice, we're seeing that the companies are now deprioritizing diversity of experience and backgrounds and putting more emphasis on someone who's done it before. And as you know, when we emphasize what former CEOs or CEOs who have experience at being CEOs, you're going to see more men being put into these roles. So, for example, we saw in the cohort after 2019 of 12% of new CEOs being females, and after the pandemic announcement in March 2020, that number decreased to 6%. So, where we had made strides in terms of moving forward, we're starting to see a decline. So, globally, women make up only 5% of CEOs globally. The highest number is in Ireland, which is at 15%, and Brazil at 0%. So we're starting to see, if we start going back to only people who've done it before, then we're going to start seeing that that is going to continue to be male influence. What we've really seen over the past year is that companies, as they prepare to emerge from the pandemic, that they need to start having a look in depth at their pipeline of future leaders to ensure that they're developing a deep and wide bench of diverse executives, including women leaders, providing the experiences and the opportunities required for the top job if this were to happen again in the challenging future. So, we have to make sure that the bench is strong. We have to make sure that there are those opportunities going forward. So while the proven track record is extremely important during periods of uncertainty, we know that broader diversity of experience, sustainability, and purpose will be viewed as critical to the long-term survival and growth when the global business environment returns to some semblance of normal.
Yeah, that's some really interesting numbers there. Excuse me. So what are some of the trends that you're seeing around women in the workforce as a result of the pandemic?
Well, it's no surprise that the articles are all over, right? But the women have really taken on an incredible burden during the pandemic. The research shows that women at all levels and in all types of job have been disproportionately impacted. Hence the term she-cession and what we talked about at the outset. Working women with children still at home have faced enormous challenges due to lack of adequate childcare, the burdens of working and homeschooling. And globally, studies have shown that women in every country are leaving the workforce or experiencing job loss at higher rates than men. As we get to the leadership ranks, the stats for women executives aren't any better. At the close of 2020, female CEOs took the ranks at several top Fortune 500 companies. So great to see women appointed at UPS, Clorox, Citigroup as a few examples. Because as the research suggested, they're embodying characteristics that are often sought after in a crisis like the COVID-19 pandemic, but it can have unintended consequences and what is now being called the glass cliff phenomenon, where women are taking on higher risk for failure as the successors to men in these uncertain times. So again, this, it emphasizes our concerns and focus around future talent pipelines, and companies need to take a purposeful approach to how they are developing a deep and wide bench of diverse executives, including women, as I said previously.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask, am I allowed to ask questions now, JF?
You go ahead, go ask me all the questions you want.
Great. So when it comes to Scotiabank's customers, I'm curious, what are the trends that you're seeing from women clients? And have you noticed anything out of the ordinary as a result of the pandemic?
Well, just about everything related to the pandemic is out of the ordinary, but it's been, as you've indicated, it's been really quite striking how the pandemic has affected various parts of economies around the world that are in which women are overwhelmingly represented. And obviously we're talking about kind of the more social aspects of our economy. So, arts, entertainment, education, food and accommodation, all those kinds of things are industries where women are much more represented than men. The industries where visible minorities are much more represented than Caucasians. So there's this, and that's affected obviously our client base. It's affected, I think, every organization's client base in a similar manner. I would say, what's striking about all of this though is the extent to which the resilience of women has been demonstrated. So one of the things that is, very, very odd is when you look at the employment impacts, again, across our footprint, so this is not unique to Canada, is the extent to which, again, folks have been personally affected by the pandemic. Yet when we look at, for instance, default rates, when we look at kind of the financial performance of a range of customers, generally speaking, they've been far, far more resilient than we thought they were going to be. Now, that could speak to, things like, and there's evidence that suggests this, that women in general are better, managers of financial affairs for a household than men are. It could be that, the government support measures that were put in place, help kind of transition to a post-COVID world. But it has been quite remarkable the extent to which, the nature of the shock being as large as it is, that it's had, obviously detrimental impact for a range of groups, women in particular. Yet from a financial perspective, it hasn't been as hard and as dramatic as we thought it was going to be. So that's, it's a bit of a, kind of the flip side of the coin to some extent. It's been horrific, but not as bad as we would have thought in terms of the implications of that for household finances, for instance.
Mm-hmm. One of the things you talk about household finances and women being, I forget the term that you use, but being able to manage money more effectively. We've seen modeling that will show that women will be in control of more wealth than ever before. So, for example, there are numerous reports that predict that women are going to be poised to control a massive portion of wealth in the U.S. by 2030. Do you think that the pandemic has or will continue to have a negative impact on that trajectory for women-owned wealth, or what are you seeing in terms of that going forward?
Yeah, without any question. I mean, from a very, very big picture perspective, again, one of the surprising things about the pandemic has been the extent to which wealth has increased globally. Right? Equity markets have done well, housing markets have done well. So generally speaking, you've seen an increase in wealth across the board. Now that's something that affects everybody. Obviously, if you're a holder of wealth, you've benefited more than somebody who had a little bit less wealth. But if you look at the drivers of wealth, so if you look at one of the reasons, women are increasingly wealthy, and that pace is actually accelerating relative to men. It's things that have to do with entrepreneurship. It's things that have to do with access to the workforce, access to commercial opportunities. And here, obviously, the pandemic's changed things around for certain industries, but I think the more worrisome aspect of this is one of the impacts of the pandemic has been, particularly in countries where the social supports aren't as important as they are, say, in Canada or the U.S. Is younger women will have tended to need or have needed to stay home more than men have to, either to take care of children, and this applies to teenagers as well, right? That your mother and your father are out of work or have got to go back to work. Oftentimes it'll be the education of women in the family that suffer, and that can be very, very long-lasting in terms of impact. So it's true in emerging markets, true in developing countries. It's also true in an industrialized context like Canada's, right? So we know that women are going to be out of the labor force longer than men are going to be as a result of this. That's just an empirical fact. And a year or two delay in terms of accessing the labor market or accessing education relative to your male competitors is a big deal. Right, it really does set people behind, and that when you kind of bring that forward a few years after years of experience, in corporations or the public sector, whatever it is, it disadvantages. It has got the potential to disadvantage women and wealth accumulation by women quite significantly when you kind of roll that up over the next 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years. So it's absolutely an area of focus for governments and to try and ensure that the scarring as it relates to women and their participation in the labor force, their skills development is repaired as soon as possible, because you risk just interrupting this what had been a very positive trend pre-COVID on this front.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about this in terms of the markets that you operate in, and governments looking at this quite closely. I imagine that with the fact that you are a major employer in these markets, that the governments have engaged with the bank in discussions around the future of women. Any insight you can give into some of those discussions and what the potential solutions might be?
Yeah, I mean, from a very simplistic perspective, the no-brainer in a lot of countries is childcare, right? If we look at the experience across countries, if we look at the experience even across Canada, and look at the experience of Quebec, where there is, effectively kind of national childcare, female participation rates are much higher in Quebec than they are in the rest of the country, and that is because childcare is available and it's super cheap. So we know that access to high quality childcare and affordable childcare is a key determinant of whether or not women are going to participate in the labor force to the same extent as men are. Because like it or not, I mean, the reality is that when you look at surveys of who spends more time dealing with family affairs, kids and all this kind of stuff in a family, women do much more of that than men do. So the sacrifice is clear. Women sacrifice themselves for the good of the family much more than men do. So if you can, set in place policies that at least, reduce the financial burden, the financial impact of going to work, that's a very positive thing. So that's one thing, and that's the thing that kind of everybody thinks about. But I think what's really interesting and important about the pandemic is, it's really shown a spotlight on inequality. And that's true from a male-female perspective, but it's true from a racialized person to Caucasian person. It's true from a developmental perspective. And it's clear that governments around the world are taking inequality much more seriously now than they did pre-pandemic, right? Because it's like you can't hide from it now. Like it's very obvious that there are structural challenges in a number of countries in terms of access to the labor market, access to education, access to childcare. So what we know is happening, and this is true in various countries. International organizations are saying the same thing. So the IMF, the World Bank, the OECD, putting a focus on identifying measures that reduce inequality more generally. So it's not just childcare. It could be the tax code. It could be access to education. It could be certain types of grants. It could be rules related to sick leave, paid sick leave, which exist in some places and not in others. So governments are, as far as we can tell, are really thinking about, a lot of governments, not every government, are really thinking about addressing inequality in a very broad fashion, in a way that actually has the potential, if you look at it from from an optimistic perspective, has the potential, if it's done well, to really turbocharge, if you will, the reduction in inequality that was had actually, quite honestly, been stalled for a number of years. So this is a very bad event. That's making everybody's eyes kind of a little bit more open to the challenge that we face, and is forcing or is encouraging policymakers to really run with it. And so that maybe in 3, 4, 5 years, we actually might be in a better space, in terms of inequality, certainly relation to women participation in the economy, than we would have absent this crisis. So it's a kind of making lemonade out of lemons situation, but I am very hopeful that is the case this time.
Yeah, great.
Now, in terms of coming back to you, Dominique, now recognizing the seat that you're in, what do you think some of the remedies are from your perspective to, encouraging women back into the labor force, or what can employers do to try and again, add to this momentum that there seems to be from a policy perspective?
Right. So I think a couple of things. So first, I think overall, the organizations need to continue to focus on building diverse and inclusive organizations. You spoke about inequality, and I think that over the last year we've seen a number of things that have pushed the building of diverse and inclusive organizations as a priority, pushed by the Me Too movement and renewed calls for racial equality and social justice following the killing of George Floyd. So this past year has been has moved a lot of that thinking forward, I believe. Companies from this perspective need to be intentional and purposeful. Intentionality is a key part of the change, and there has to be that commitment to open-mindedness and creating a purposeful plan. So it's not enough to say we're aware that it's a problem. It's what is our plan? How are we going to do this, and how are we going to address this problem? I think it's open. It's important to develop diverse leadership pipelines. We've talked about this before, but I'm going to keep harping on that, because I think making sure that the talent is there. It's to help the employees build the business and personal skills that they need to succeed at the executive level. So the development plans that you all put in place. Part of these efforts need to include advancing women into leadership roles, and leaders and organizations need to take a more decisive and thoughtful approach to building diverse representation, succession planning, diverse talent development, and inclusive culture building. D&I success requires companies to create inclusive environments with sponsorship, mentorship, and allyship embedded in the culture. In many companies, we're starting to see, employees are watching to determine if a company's corporate mission and values indicate that people from diverse backgrounds are valued. And even through our interview processes, as we look to place candidates in different companies, this is an important consideration where it wasn't before. And so our candidates are asking that. From our perspective, we look at our company, and we look specifically, that more than 50% of our board is diverse, 60% of our executive officers are diverse, and 33% of our management committee is diverse. We have some of the more established practices, the larger practices being run by women, And an African American male leads our North American CEO and board practice and our global D&I practice as well. So lots of you need to walk the talk. From the perspective of ensuring that your culture is inclusive and supportive of female leaders in particular, but you can whoever in your organization, I think the mentorship programs are incredibly important. That's important both from and we talk about mentoring and also sponsoring, right? Making sure that people are being watched and given the opportunity to move things forward. I personally have had some great mentors in my life who have helped me move my career forward, but importantly, people within the organization, as I've moved to Heidrick, who have allowed me to, build into this practice leadership role that I have right now. I also think that companies have, with their employee resource groups, that they can be an incredibly effective arm of an organization's D&I strategy, important from the standpoint of giving people a forum where they can identify, safely identify problems and look to find solutions supported by the company. And then finally, I would say, the couple of other points is just, it'll be interesting to see how the remote, what happens when we talk about the new normal, right? Everyone talks about what's it going to be like when we're all vaccinated and everybody's ready to go back. A remote workforce in some ways can really help level the playing field for women, less commute, making some of these other obligations that they have at home a little bit easier. Or more manageable, I guess is probably the right way to say it. At the same time, and I know that you're all thinking about this in terms of your own real estate decisions, what is the importance of face time in the office as part of performance reviews, and what does that mean, and how does that advantage or disadvantage certain demographics? I also think that there's the other thing we've seen, and you talked a little bit about that in terms of how companies can encourage people to come back to work, and looking at the ideas of what are called returnships, right, for women who have left the workforce and looking to reinvigorate the workforce. In Canada specifically, or in Canada specifically, I think there's a Return to Bay Street is one of the and if I'm getting the titling wrong, I apologize, but it's about women who have been out of the workforce and coming back. And I think we have to think about that post-pandemic, is to see if there are opportunities and ways of being able to get people re-engaged in the workforce.
No, it's some great points there. In particular, I mean, it's something that I've been thinking about as a manager with our team as well. Is, it's one thing for folks that are well established in their careers to be working from home. They've got the networks, they've got the skills and experience, and there's not necessarily perceived kind of impingement on their progression. Whereas if you're a much more junior employee, then the benefits of networking, face time, and all those things are in some sense much more valuable. And you make a great point if you apply that along the gender dimension at the same time, where if you're trying to in an organization encourage more upward movement on the part of women or greater intake, is this new world that we're going to be in going to be more conducive to that or less conducive to that, given that we are dealing with, things that might potentially make it a little bit harder for people to establish themselves as a young individual in the organization. I do want to come back though to the idea that, so you are obviously, as I said, top talent scout, particularly in the financial services world. Is there anything about the financial services industry in particular that is, more of a challenge or more of an opportunity from a gender perspective? I understand everything you've spoken about. It's based on experience and it's all extremely valuable. But there's something, intrinsically different about our industry that makes it harder or easier to advance on the gender dimension than might be appreciated, generally speaking.
Right. Well, I think, I think the good news is that if you see the banks, and if if it starts at the top, the banks have been leading in terms of the board representation, really thinking that through. And the board at Scotiabank 30 years ago, I am positive would look very different than it does today. And I think that's something that we should be proud of. I think the fact that where we're located, where we work, gives us an opportunity in terms of, from the standpoint of being more urban, more centralized. It gives us more opportunities to be able to attract talent, as opposed to, let's say, when we're working in mining industries or things like that, where there's some choices in terms of small towns. I think that the industry very broadly has done a very good job in sort of functional roles, in terms of expertise around things like whether it's legal, human resources, risk and compliance, those types of things. From a female perspective, I think we're getting very good representation there. I think the challenge for everyone is to start looking at the roles around P&L ownership, and what are we doing in terms of making sure that people have the right development plans in place to be able to get into those P&L roles. So I think that's where that's the next challenge. So I think we've come a long way, and I think that there's a lot of the systems are in place. I do think that women are choosing this industry, and I think that we will continue to be able to attract top women to this. It's about making the opportunity greater and more broad within the bank, and really keeping that in mind as we're developing our people.
Yeah, no, those are great points. And I guess one of the things that we think about more from an economic perspective when it relates to labor market choices is this issue of incentive. So, what is my incentive to undertake a particular task or go into a particular job or a particular industry relative to somebody else's? How do I balance a range of considerations that are specific to me, and how do those kind of match up with a particular employer, a particular geography, a particular set of skills? And increasingly, I find, or at least we're seeing in some of the data that we look at, that the balance of power is shifting to some extent. Like as a result of this general observation that that women are underrepresented in a lot of parts of our economy, overrepresented in other parts, the parts that have been most affected by the pandemic. But in this recognition that there is still a significant challenge to address, that it effectively puts a little bit more power in the hands of women who want to affect change, who will have a little bit more, I think, more discretion, saying, you know what, I'm not interested in a job if that's what you're asking me. I'm not interested in a job where, you're going to make me work at 6:30 on a Friday night when, I want to have dinner with my kids. And it's, in a sense, that's the market speaking, which is a great thing. That's that can happen without policy influence, but it does as you shift the center of power away from kind of the traditional, this is a job, you take it or leave it, versus actually, well, this is a job, but I really want you, so I'm willing to adapt on those kinds of things. Are you seeing some of that in terms of how, when it comes to you placing folks, that women are a little bit more demanding in terms of what it is that they want out of an organization relative to what would have been the case a few years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in many instances, what I'm hearing from both men and women, but women in particular, is, I'm not going back to the way it was before, and here are my boundaries now. And I think that for many of us, I think we now understand, this has reshifted some of our priorities, and women in particular are setting the boundaries in terms of what are the demands for face time. How is the organization valuing contribution versus the requirements to be away for a long period of time, or to for different things. And that's not to say that everyone is setting those boundaries, but they're setting their boundaries, right? It's the old thing around folks are saying, let's not let a pandemic go to waste, in terms of really what is it that I'm going to start, stop, and continue as a result of some of these things that I've learned about myself, my organization, and what I want going forward as my new normal, as opposed to somebody else defining their new normal. People are taking they're being much more proactive and saying, this is how I want it to be.
Yeah, it's one of the many ways in which I think the pandemic can lead for good, and there's an attitude adjustment on the part of men as well. Like, I mean, the reality, for instance, in our family is I have a job that takes me. I live in Ottawa. I have a job that requires me to be in Toronto a lot and travel a lot, and as a consequence of that, there are things that I haven't been doing as a partner in years leading up to the pandemic that I'm doing now, which I love. I love taking my kids to the bus stop in the morning, for instance. It's silly, but it's and it's minor. I like making dinners, and these are things that I can do now that I haven't been able to do before to the extent that I am now. And it's just a shift in kind of household responsibility. It's minor, but just an example of how the pandemic is allowing us as a family, our family, to just adapt in minor ways that are beneficial to me and are beneficial to hopefully my kids and my wife as well. Yeah. Thank you for your time, Dominique. It's been a fascinating chat. There's so much going on in the world with respect to the pandemic and how we're dealing with it. The gender dimension is incredibly important in that, as we've seen over last year, and you've given us some really, really interesting insights into how this is working out and the challenges going forward. So I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank everybody for joining in as well. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.